There's a hitting coach, and he's a guy who actually once hit in his life. In fact, he hit in Pittsburgh. Good morning to you. Good Thursday morning. I'm Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports. This is Daily Shot of Pirates. It comes your way bright and early every weekday. If you're into football and or hockey, I also offer daily shots of Steelers and Penguins in the same place that you found this. Matt Haig is his name, and if that doesn't ring a bell for you, don't feel bad about it, but he did make it to the Pirates about a decade ago. In fact, he came up through their system, wasn't here long, just a couple months, and in his time after that in the Blue Jays organization, it went pretty much the same for him. He was one of those guys who could really rake in AAA and then just couldn't make it on any sustained level once he got to the bigs. And yeah, he's the new hitting coach. He's Ben Cherington's choice to be the hitting coach. News that became known yesterday out of Toronto, where he'd been the assistant hitting coach and didn't appear to be in line for promotion. So Haig arrives with a couple of clear and glaring, actually, distinctions from his predecessor here, Andy Haynes. One, to repeat, he actually did this for a living. He wasn't the best, and he didn't stick the way he wanted to, but he did it. Another is that he was considered by people in Canada, even yesterday, you could see, hear, and read this in the baseball community, to be a loss for the Blue Jays, a loss for the Blue Jays players who really liked him. And for whatever this is worth for their fans. This wasn't treated as a tragedy up there, but it was not seen as a positive, particularly for an organization that's been trying anyway to build on young hitters for a while. Now, there's not going to be any word about what Haig would intend to bring to Pittsburgh until he gets, well, first of all, the team has to formally announce the signing. They didn't do that yesterday. But from there, I have no doubt there will be an interview session and there will be all kinds of questions asked. And my guess is that at least some of those questions will involve, do you find it okay when hitters just watch strike three go by? Because I think the guy who just hired you is kind of okay with it. Nah. I mean, you're going to find out about his philosophies. I'm joking here, all right? You're going to find out what he believes in, but you're also going to find out, in all likelihood, that hitting coaches in 2024 don't sound like they did even in 2014. The same applies to pitching coaches. The amount of information that has just overwhelmed both of these occupations to the point that it's not seen as being anywhere near enough to have a single hitting coach or a single pitching coach. There can be a team of these guys, and Cherington himself kind of hinted at that about a month and a half ago, that he'd be looking for a team of hitting coaches, but that would be guided by one individual. Well, that individual is going to be Haig. And all I'm hoping for out of this scenario is that he is, in fact, allowed to be an individual. Whatever that happens to wind up being, he needs to be able to have his own voice. He needs to be able to have his own convictions. He needs to be able to speak from his own experience, whether that's as a hitter, but more to the point, as a hitting instructor, as someone who has accumulated a lot of years now. And 6 years of doing it actually is a lot. He needs to be left alone. I say that in part because that's the best way for all coaches to operate, including positional coaches, or in football coordinators, or in hockey assistant coaches. They're best left to function from things that they believe. Now, the other, and I would hope this would have been obvious, reason I'd love to see him left alone is that I don't want Haig being touched by a 36-foot pole that happens to have one iota of Cherington's hitting philosophy at the other end of it. Because as I've been saying now for years, it wasn't just that Haynes advocated for the passive approach, it's that Haynes was hired because Cherington has believed in the passive approach. And when our reporter at DK Pittsburgh Sports, Jose Negron, asked Cherington in early October if he'd consider changing his hitting philosophy, Cherington reacted as if he'd been asked to read his high school diary out loud for everyone. So we'll see where this goes. There's a lot to learn about Haig, and there's a lot to learn about whether or not Cherington's going to allow anybody to do something that doesn't fall into his beloved process. When we come back, J1Q.
It's Gun Storage Check Week. Help prevent unwanted access to your firearms. No one wants their unsecured gun to be used in an accident, a suicide, or a crime. Use lockboxes, safes, and locks to secure your firearms. Learn more at gunstoragecheck.org. That's gunstoragecheck.org. Brought to you by NSSF, the Firearm Industry Trade Association.
Today's J1Q comes from John, who asks, "Hey DK, didn't the Pirates buy out Brian Hayes too? That's looking a little shaky right now." For anyone unfamiliar with John's context there, yesterday's J1Q brought up the possibility that the Pirates could attempt to buy out a couple of years of free agency from Paul Skeens. Baseball being a little different than other sports, you can hold on to a player for 6 full years. In football, it's 5. In hockey, it's 3. And in baseball, you can do it for 6. So when you're talking about an extension for someone who's that new, and Skeens, of course, just finished his rookie year, what you're really talking about is tacking on years on top of the 6. That, in turn, makes it a lot less likely that he'd be traded along the way because you know you're going to have him. You don't have to send him out. You don't have to ship him off before you'd lose him for nothing through free agency. I happen to really like the aggressive approach that a good number of teams, including low revenue, low payroll teams, will take on these counts. Yeah, sometimes you're going to get bitten by it. Sometimes if you're the Rays, you're going to find out that Wander Franco is all kinds of seedy and he might bomb out, although they're not actually going to be on the hook for that contract because he's on the restricted list. So probably not the best example. But let's say, you know, that there's a young player who comes along and does really well and you sign him to one of these long-term deals and then they get some sort of significant injury or just have some massive, inexplicable lapse in performance. My feel for this, and that's all it is because I've not either done or seen research on this, is that probably for every 3 of these that you do, you're going to have one that bombs. But that's still a nice rate as related to the overall security that you have as a franchise, the overall peace of mind that your fan base has. And oh, by the way, you still end up saving money on it. Over the long haul, it's still cheaper. So if you look at since Ben Cherington's been in place, Key was the first of the longer-term signings. I'm still not going to criticize anybody for that. I'm sorry. Key's had back troubles. As someone who used to have them myself, I'm always going to be empathetic to that and how unpredictable it is and how challenging it can be to address. The Pirates and Cherington and his people, by every accounting, did nothing wrong. And in fact, on those occasions when Key has been healthy, like all the way healthy, and those have been real events, he's been very good. Don't forget what he did in the second half of 2023 when he was the best defender in all of baseball at any position and also was really, really productive at the plate. Now, Cherington also signed Brian Reynolds to a long-term deal. I think we can all agree that's been a worthwhile investment, as I was confident that it would be. And he signed Mitch Keller to a contract. It's not quite in the mold of what I'm talking about with Skeens, but it got into Mitch's arbitration years, and it did buy out a couple of his free agency years. So Mitch, of course, went on to have another nice season. Slowed down a little bit there at the end, but you have to understand that this is someone who takes a lot of pride in giving the team 30 starts, 200 innings, whatever the modern benchmark versions of that would be. Mitch goes wire to wire. And when you do that, you're not going to be the same pitcher in late September that you were early on. So what are we talking about here? The ratio so far is 2 out of 3. That's not terrible. And again, if Key can find his way back, and there's a medical plan in place for him to try to get to Bradenton in the strongest possible shape. And that was another thing I learned from my back issues, is that you have to be crazy strong in your other back muscles and your core muscles and like your butt muscles and other things like that, because you have to be able to support the back to allow the back to heal itself. You don't want the back doing all the work. So if Key can come back stronger than ever, come on, I had to do it. Then you'll be 3 for 3. And if you do Skeens or you do Jared Jones, and don't forget that they were intending on trying something similar with David Bednar last spring. Then when he started having some physical issues, they backed off of that. No pun that time, I swear. But that's one that they would have wanted back. I gotta let that go. I appreciate the question. As always, I appreciate everyone listening to Daily Shot of Pirates. We're going to do another one of these tomorrow.